Okay, let's start.
Okay.
All right, let's kick off, and thank you for coming, our audience, beyond the screen, though, but we are quite welcome everybody actually to joining this talk. And then today, Gcth, the book talk have two authors, Warren Neidich and then Nicolas Bourriaud. And then and then we have very preeminent authors who bring together a theory and art. Very fantastic moment to bring them together here, and I'm very honored to have them. So actually, before starting their talks, and then I'm gonna introduce two authors. Of course, we don't need. I don't need actually, the introduce them already, quite famous, but kind of a process, right? Okay, just Warren. Warren is working between Berlin and New York City, and the American multimedia artist and theorist. And then Warren gathers poesis and then method of pataphysics to generate text-based works of illuminated neon glass. It's so-called the neon art, something like that. So very beautiful, and then very, the strategic way to engage today's technological scene in terms of art. In 2015, he founded and now directs the SASPE Summers Institute of Art, a nomadic art academy, focusing on the state of contemporary theory, especially as it relates to art, culture, politics, and the brain. His recent awards include the Mahjong Sugar Fellowship, and then Paris and the Getty Research Fellowship, both in 2023. The Glossary of Cognitive Activism was just published by Iris Press, UK, and is available through Columbia University Press. It's actually published, the months ago, so you can get, his book on any good, bookshop. Okay, actually, the next author is Nicolas Bourriaud. And then he is, actually, he's quite famous. And then he's already, established his own field in terms of relational, the aesthetics. And then everybody would know, this the concept. He's a French art critic and theoretician and curator. And then Nicolas was a co-founder and the co-director of Palade Tokyo and Paris. And then Gulbenkian curator for contemporary art at Tate Britain, and director of L'École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts in Paris. He's the author of the landmark book, Relational Aesthetics, and first published in 1998, and still inspirational today for many artists, curators, and art professionals worldwide. Nicola is also recognized by English-speaking audiences for his works, Post-Production 2001, and then X-Form 2015, and then in the the Radicant 2009 seeks to delineate the dawn of global modernity shaped by translation and nomadic forms, and challenging postmodern aesthetic rooted in the identity. Meanwhile, the X-Form engaged dynamic of ideology, particularly in relation to the concept of productivity and waste, inclusion and exclusion, as they intersect with society and production of art, drawing insight from the work of Louis Althusser. So actually, these are very impressive, the works, and then both author, and then, wanna use the theory or theoretical concept to reformulate the meaning of art in the age of high tech, the capitalism. And then that is very impressive, in my opinion. So that's why just we, have, their talk today. So I'm very, looking forward. I'm very looking forward, their talks and then insightful engagement, current issue in terms of art and theory. Okay, I thank you for coming. Thank you for joining this event, Warren and Nicola. So I wanna, you present, some idea whether related to relating to your book or not, or some anything the relevant to a current issue, and then just the turn my actually I just give my turn to Warren. So the screen is yours, Warren. Then actually Nicola.
Oh, thank you very much, Alex, for your invitation. And I'm also very honored to be sharing this event with Nicholas, who I've actually known since 1993. It's really amazing how long we go back. Yeah, and today I would be happy to share with you some of the ideas about concerning um, the molar concepts of my book, The Glossary of Cognitive Activism. You can't really read it on the screen, I'm sorry, but it's published by Eris, and it's you can get it through Columbia University Press. Amazon is already sold out, so please. So I just want to say a few comments about the book and the journey of this book, The Glossary of Cognitive Activism, has been neither a linear, consonant, progressive harmony, nor an accelerando. It has instead been a labor of chance encounters, a combination of adagio and allegro, of fits and starts. It is a gradual and digressive labor through time that commenced with the first edition published by Archive Books in 2016. The second and third editions were again published by Archive, and this fourth edition is now published by Eris. The first edition served two purposes. First, it was meant to accompany my three-part Psychopathologies of Cognitive Capitalism, also published by Archive, as a glossary or dictionary of terms found therein, so as to enhance the longer work's transmission of knowledge to a public readership. Secondly, the definitions were meant to be utilized as one stood in front of my neon diagrammatic works, such as the Statisticon Neon 2017 and the Pizzagate Neon at the Venice Biennale in 2019, in order to aid their interpretation. So the idea was the book was available at the Venice Biennale as a kind of catalog for the show, and you would have the book with you. And when you looked at the sculpture, you would have the book to refer to, because a lot of the words in the sculpture were neologisms that I had made up, like neuropower, but others were part of the new semantic economy that surrounded fake news and Pizzagate and the whole conditions of the 2016 presidential election. Recently, my project, A Proposition for an Alt Parthenon Marbles Recoded, The Phantom as Other, generated also new lexicons, which have been adopted in the fourth edition. So the social, political, cultural, technological relations that define the epics to which each of the glossaries were tethered were reflected in the choice of terms and in the degree of their relative importance. For instance, the first edition, formulated in the wake of the 2016 presidential election, context between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, required certain kinds of terms like memes, keck, fake news, Pizzagate. But for instance, keck was removed in this edition because it's no longer relevant. But on the other hand, I added terms like post-truth society, which was related to keck and meme magic and all these things, but has really come into prominence recently. This edition understands the impending climate disaster. This is the important thing about this edition. This edition understands the impending climate disaster, or the Anthropocene, as our most important concern, while also understanding its connection to capitalism and technology. The arms race has been subsumed by the race for superintelligence. I have therefore also added such terms as ChatGPT, collective intelligence, deep fake, algorithmic governmentality in the consciousness industry, to address these new technological conditions, as well as to relate them as they are important for addressing the climate disaster. such as words like ecocene, the Gaia hypotheses, ecoagnosia, critical zones, ecocide, and cognitive justice. Ecocene is particularly important because it invents a term that engages with the relations so eloquently described by the late Bernard Stiegler as a sequential conservation of the force of epiphylogenesis, or later in his life, what he calls exomatic organogenesis. Epiphylogenesis concretizes cultural residues left over by preceding generations and forms of cultural memory as tools that, on one hand, generate a phylogenesis of inorganic memory or tertiary memory, and on the other, through a process of epigenesis, new neurobiological structures as adaptive organogenesis. That's what he means by exomatic organogenesis. And he uses this, I'll get into that in a second, how he describes this. This is the key to the new volume. The brain is not confined to the bony skull, but reaches out and becomes entangled with the social, political, technological, and spiritual relations in a choreography of coevolution. This is a becoming brain that can't be measured in stasis. It is not a crystalline structure of unchanging relations, but rather it is dynamic. The changes in brain structure that characterize the ascent of man from Homo habilis to Homo sapiens, which Stiegler talks about, are characterized by, on the one hand, the protuberance of the frontal lobe, or the enlargement of the parietal and temporal lobes, and on the other hand, the production of social media and the science of deep learning neural network intelligence. I'm also not, just for time's sake, I'm not talking about the indigenous knowledges, shamanism, the cosmos, the cosmology, and I'm not psychoactive drugs. I'm not talking about that kind of knowledge just because I don't have time for that. But I want you to know that I'm thinking about those things. There is no reason to believe that this process is still not ongoing. In other words, the brain is still changing and co-evolving with techniques. The glossary argues that the history of techniques is an anthropocenic or anthropocentric one, and that the evolution of techniques has been one characterized by the destruction of the planet and capitalist consumption of its natural resources for the sole benefit of man, especially Western man, who superciliously considers himself, herself, superior to all other life forms, human, animal, and plant. But it has looped back upon itself to bring humans themselves to the brink of destruction. This is the process Stiegler mentioned, which has in fact created, and what I'm arguing is an anthropocentric brain, or as I have called it, an intracranial, extracranial complex, and its psychopathologies as ecoagnosia, or climate denial, the inability to recognize climate change. And this was, Bruno Latour talked about this subject quite a lot. Make no mistake about it. ChatGPT and Neuralink, the new company, the new brain-computer interface company called Neuralink, are anthropocentric technologies and will further generate the despotic conditions and racist and sexist tendencies already underway. I'm further calling for a new assortment or cornucopia of ecocenic technologies and artworks to be invented. Artists like Pierre Weig, Joseph Beuys, Joan Jonas have already taken the rudimentary steps. These ecocentric technologies, based on deep ecology and the love of life, will also become entangled in the process of neural digital entanglement, but with different effects. New organs of the brain and mind will result, and with it, the healing of the intersectionality of the Anthropocene, Capitalocene, and the Plantationocene. Finally, what has sewn these volumes together, and I believe contributes to their importance for our present predicament, is their interest in describing and disseminating the political philosophy of cognitive capitalism, as well as making known the regime of neural capitalism that is now at our doorstep. In cognitive capitalism, the brain and the mind are the new factories of the 20th and 21st century. We are no longer proletariats working on assembly lines, but rather cognitary. It's as Franco Berardi calls them, swiping and clicking in front of screens and creating data that is bought and sold in big data marketplaces. Another shift has recently taken place. That of the material brain has become the focal point of capitalization, investment, commodification. New technologies like ChatGPT, brain-computer interfaces, optogenetics, interact with the material brain are just some of the technologies that may pose an ethical and moral challenge in the years to come. The possibility that these technologies could intervene in the brain's capacity for change, its so-called neuroplasticity, is real and dangerous. The possibility that our brainwaves could be set to work is not confined to science fiction. Brainwave clicks could, in time, substitute for mouse clicks. And in fact, they are on some video games and in some that the Army and the military through the DARPA is experimenting with telepathic regimes that are linked to brainwaves that are allowing thought and communication to be as fast as the speed of light. The code that is necessary to engage a brainwave to move a mouse on a screen. So if somebody is paraplegic and confined to a wheelchair, their brainwaves they can learn to use their brainwaves, which then can to change the course of a robotic arm to feed them or to move around a room in a wheelchair. But if that computer can already code a brainwave and transform it into something that can do work, like the wheelchair or the robotic arm, it's not unheard of that those codes could be used to generate an external signal that could go the other way and could penetrate the skull into the brain to connect to its ongoing activity and possibly to change it. The artificial connectome is what I'm calling this external ChatGPT brain-computer interface complex that is externalized brain, as I am referring to it, in the future could not only intervene in the electrical dispositions that characterize the minute-to-minute activity of the brain's activity, but could also intervene during the brain's most active neuroplastic moments, referred to as their critical periods. As such, the neuroarchitectonics could be sculpted by an AI-supplemented neural link system. I am arguing that this moment that is referred to the singularity in deference to how other people are using the singularity. The singularity is more than the moment in which machine intelligence subsumes human intelligence, is greater than human intelligence, or a person cannot tell if the machine or a human being has done or said something. It is more than the moment when machines code themselves. It's very important, because people are always saying, oh, we can always control these machines. We'll never get to this point of the singularity because we'll always be in control of their code. No, machines are going to code themselves. They're already doing it. And they won't need the human intervention. The human being is becoming negated more and more by its own inventions. And this is what Nicolas, a lot of this stuff I know is referring to Nicolas's book already, but that one particularly. It is the moment when machine intelligence will by some methodology sculpt the neural diverse and neuroplastic meaty brain without humans even knowing it. So that's what I'm calling the singularity. When this external connectome, and this artificial connectome, during moments of neuroplasticity in the child between 2 and 5 and the teenager between 12 and 15, when the brain is most active and neuroplastic, it will intervene and use its machinic continents to sculpt the neuroplasticity of the brain, creating a real artificial or inorganic type of mentality, that as Stiegler has mentioned. A glossary of cognitive activism is a necessary step to create an armamentarium against the neural capitalism at our doorstep. As a society, and we, and especially the art community, must have knowledge and tools that are necessary to confront this future reality. we are not witches or shamans, but because of our outlying and eccentric position in the labor market and in the world, we have a certain amount of freedom, and we have the capacity to do things that other groups cannot. We can no longer depend on the vocabularies of rhetoric, economics, sociology, political science, and philosophy to provide us with the explanations that we need in order to think our way out of this looming conundrum. These vocabularies are inadequate. For instance, Deleuze's idea of the body without organs as a concept to resist the stultifying relations of the laboring body, of the Fordist condition of work, or the triangulation of the Freudian, certain kinds of Freudian dialectics characterized by Taylorism, is no longer adequate as a form of resistance to mental acorporal labor of the cognitariat. A new term, the brain without organs, for instance, had to be invented, which pushes back against what is referred to what I'm calling hedonism, built upon the research of gaming, neural consumerism, and neural economics. The glossary deterritorializes and deconstructs the science of brain, and where appropriate, incorporate into our own intersectional humanist mental apparatuses so as to confront the prospect of neural despotism. Neuroplasticity and neural diversity are concepts that offer us hope of eluding the prospect of neural subsumption under the guise of artistic creativity when it is not entangled with the marketplace. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so fantastic, the engagement into today's technological development, in particular ChatGPT and then chatbots and artificial intelligence. I think your talk is quite connected to the Nicolas argument in his recent book is we're gonna deal with today. So Nicolas, actually your turn, and then screen is yours.
I will try to actually speak in the path that Warren actually has drawn already. It's interesting because the two books have things to say to each other in some ways. This one so-called Inclusions, published at Sternberg Press, is, I could actually define it, if I take Warren's categories, as a kind of protest against the anthropocentric brain, in a way. Inclusions literally means that. How can artists think today, and how can we think also, by sharing qualities and space actually with the other, in a way, including having a kind of inclusive way of thinking is actually a way to think outside of the anthropocentric brain. Actually, it's the wish and the ambition to get into what I would call an ecosystemic way of thinking. What does it mean to think in terms of ecosystem? It means to have first a definition of complexity. An ecosystem is by definition complex. It's not a one-way, one-sided, a reality like the one which is purely anthropocentric. If you actually take a beehive from the field and you carry it or destroy it, it will transform the field. It will transform the whole environment around. It's actually something that could actually be found also even in very early modern painters like Cézanne or Matisse. Actually, when they write, Cézanne writes, when I add a little touch of yellow in this in the painting, it modifies the whole thing, and I have to redo everything. That's ecosystemic way of thinking at its let's say ground zero level. But that's this kind of thinking which I think is at work in today's art. The idea that it's not anymore about expressing yourself, expressing your ego. That's something which for me sounds very outdated. And if I had to define what we call the Anthropocene, what I call in the book the Capitalocene, because I think it's more accurate. Capitalocene, which is the moment where this economic system, is actually affecting and impacting the planet. It could be defined as the historical moment when the human scale is put into question, actually. And that goes with this inclusive way of thinking. We're not the universal measurement of everything, and we have to cope with that, including our representations of the world. That's why the artists who interest me the most today are the ones who go beyond this very traditional way of representing the world, like it's a figure on a background, for example. A figure on a background is the paradigmatic definition of Western way of thinking since Aristotle, actually. It's been actually everywhere into our way of thinking and representing the world. We are not the figure on the background. We are now, and we know it, immersed into a very complex ecosystem. And it makes this period of time, the early 21st century, look a little bit like the early 19th century in terms of art, because I've been writing about it in a book called Planet B, which is about the notion of sublime. It's interesting, this notion of sublime, because it's which actually was codified by Edmund Burke in 1757, if I remember well. It actually talks about being immersed in a world which is out of control, in a way. And that's exactly the feeling we do have today at this beginning of 21st century. That's the situation we're in. Being in a world whose spatial coordinates we have lost. In a world where we are in a boat with every other form of life. And that changes everything to the way we can represent the world and depict it and think it in a way. So that's where the important elements that determined the writing of inclusions. I could add a certain series of patterns, which for me are very important, that you can find everywhere. For example, the loop is a very important pattern because you can find it absolutely everywhere in our societies today. The first example I give in the book is the mad cow crisis at the very end of 20th century. It was the first loop that was discovered, let's say, in our societies, because it was created by cows eating cows, powdered cows being given as a food to living cows. And it's exactly, if you think about it, the same system than the Ponzi pyramid, same system that led to the crisis of the subprimes, the loop, money producing money and never getting out of this circle in order to address concrete material issues. It's pure loop, and you can find loops absolutely everywhere in our world. So the loop is one of those formal patterns which are actually driving our world today. And that's really important to see how it can be translated, and it's very present also in today's art. Everything that I can tell about the Anthropocene, you can see it in today's art. It's like if the artist had the antennas to translate into very specific forms the exact movement of the times. And that's what interests me in the contemporary art, actually. Another pattern which interests me, which is linked to the loop, is the Larsen effect, actually, or feedback effect. When you actually put two microphones too close one to each other, it creates what's called the feedback effect. And it's the sound that actually is created by lack of space, by lack of distance. And this, for me, I don't remember if I write about it in the book, but certainly yes, is a little bit the exact opposite of what Walter Benjamin called the aura, that he actually defined as the unique apparition of a faraway element. The faraway doesn't exist anymore. Distance is a very rare element in our lives today. We're actually into the era of immediacy and of high speed. There's no such a thing as distance in the way that Walter Benjamin was actually watching the blue lines of the mountains from which actually invented the notion of aura. This has completely disappeared, and we have to think in different terms today, actually. Art history, the art of the museums in the Western world, show us humans distinctly cut out from the element, from their environment, actually. No, within an environment, which is another word for decor, actually. So that's exactly the pattern, I think, which is disappearing today. And if you take some artists like Pierre Huyghe, for example, I talk a lot about his work in the book. He has a very deep explanation of what he's doing, which would necessitate maybe hours of discussion. He says art is not exposing or showing something to someone, it's exposing someone to something, which I think is a very, very deep and very interesting way of redefining the artistic practice today. It goes also with this notion of distance, actually. But most of it, I would say that my book is an accusation or a plea against what could be called the binary way of thinking. Binary means, as I was saying, in Aristotle, you can find this very fundamental idea that has determined the history of the Western world, which is the idea that an image, any life form, even in Aristotle, is the impression of a form upon matter. And if you think about it, it's completely insane, actually. Of course, it's one aspect of what an image can be, but it's certainly not the key for all images. And I think today's artists have gone out or tried to go out of this system, which is dominated by this very strong idea that an image is form upon matter. In my way of thinking, everything is a form and everything is matter. The two are intertwined. They exchange their properties all the time. And I think that's the key for the new aesthetics, actually. And that's the first binarism, according to me, because this binarism, form upon matter, leads to active upon passive, leads to civilized against colonized, leads to man versus woman, etc., etc. The idea of the active upon the passive is a kind of paradigmatic form which has dominated the last 2 millenniums. And that's the Anthropocene crisis is, in my opinion, a way to get out of this era. Maybe it's an opportunity to get out of this way of thinking. And that here we can reconnect with Warren's book, because that's, of course, this brain revolution that we have to lead, which also goes with evacuating some patterns that we are prisoners of, actually.
Warren, do you have any response?
Yeah, I mean, I think any response, there was so much there. Okay.
Let's launch something.
Yeah, well, I think that yeah, with every devastating condition, there can be some you know, some positive thing that can come out of it. I just hope we don't have to have so much pain from the Anthropocene. But you know, I love the what I was drawn to was that that the Capitalocene is the economic system that is affecting the planet, and it kind of overwhelms the Anthropocene. And that Capitalocene, what's really quite interesting is the incredible change that has happened in the Capitalocene. The Capitalocene is a digital revolution, and that digital revolution is the essence of this new type of laborer worker, which is called the cognitariat. And so I think that that how the system, the economic system, is perpetrating this kind of attack on the mental. It's the mental laborer who is being really affected today by ChatGPT. I mean, in the past, technologies have always been, they always say, oh, you know, everyone says, oh, you know, we don't really have to worry about these new technologies because we've had this kind of situation before. The tractor took over the oxen, the car took over the horse and buggy. And everybody at that time was saying that it was the end of the world, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think that the Capitalocene, and I think the new kinds of digitalization are different because they're affecting the mental labor, and they're substituting for the mental labor, and they are having effects of the externalization. One of the problems, and of course Stiegler talks about this, and I've been talking about this also, is this externalization of cognitive and mental processes. Okay, let me give you an example. I love to give this example of neural capitalism. People ask me, like, you know, what do I mean by neural capitalism? Let's take, for example, the GPS system. I don't know if you would agree with me. I hope you would. But if you notice, the young people, especially, have never learned wayfinding. They always are carrying around, even if they're going to the grocery store now, if they're going to the corner grocery store, they take out their computer and they look on how to go. They use their GPS. They don't seem to be able to go anywhere without using their GPS. So therefore, this wayfinding ability of ours, this cognitive ability that I have, like I can even go to LA right now and I don't even use or I can go to Paris and I don't even use my iPhone. I know these cities well enough. I learned them by traveling and walking through them and driving through them, that I learned the streets and I have a general sense of direction and I find my way without a GPS. But there's a certain number of younger people who I think are dependent on it. I don't know. I find that to be true. Would you agree to that? Would you agree that young people, a certain group of them are completely connected to their iPhones for finding their way? Have you noticed this also? Anybody? Just because.
Of course, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
of course, yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is, even though wayfinding is a very complicated capacity, it's not just, it's the hippocampus, where the posterior hippocampus, especially where a lot of spatial memories are maintained and kept, is connected primarily to the parietal lobe, but it's connected also to the frontal eye fields and various parts of the frontal cortex and the cerebellum. It's a complex network. However, what happens is that between the 12 and 13 years old, 12 to 15 years old, when the second part of the critical periods or sensitive periods for neuroplastic engagement, for especially for the development of personality and all these other kinds of things, that's when these kids, when the children are getting, or the adolescents are getting their iPhones and are using them the most. And it's also the time when they have their own self-mobility. They don't have to have their parents taking them anymore. They go to places on their own. They're allowed to go out by themselves.
Parents are bad GPS anyway.
What?
Parents are bad GPS anyway.
Right. There you go. What happens is they never develop their capacity for wayfinding in the way that I have. Now, recently, friends have told me, I was on Facebook the other day, and they said, oh, go to The Guardian. There's an amazing article that was at The Guardian. And so I went to The Guardian, and it said, I got to The Guardian, and it said to me, I'm sorry, you've been here 10 times. You now have to pay. What I'm arguing is that these kids who have never learned wayfinding, who haven't developed the cognitive apparatus, who haven't developed the networks in the brain to wayfind, will be confronted soon in the next 10 years by their GPS telling them that they've used it 25 times and they no longer can use it unless they pay. That is neural capitalism. Perfect. Yeah. So that's
a very good definition.
Yeah. Good definition, neural capitalism. But I'm wondering, what is the fundamental difference between neural capitalism and cognitive capitalism? Jan Butang already defined, cognitive capitalism. And then another question about your talk is that, all right, just we can see that lots of people are connecting each other by GPS and an iPhone. But, think about it, there might be some kind of, some uneven development technology. What you actually described in terms of such a connecting and then very intensive use of that kind of iPhone, and then actually new type of the brain plasticity is actually, controlled by the kind of algorithm. But, it's not quite an even one. That means not all people on this earth, use that technology. Do you know what I mean? Of course, actually, even, the right. Amazon tribe, I know that they're using iPhone and then, but, if they're using that kind of iPhone, they don't want to go, anywhere, then their place, something like that. And then that means they would have some kind of, I think that is, this idea could be connected to Nicolas' argument, is a subject to something like the inclusion, actually, there might be some kind of overdetermination about that kind of plasticity. Actually, that is the meaning of plasticity, as far as I understand. That kind of technology cannot determine, brain, but the brain must be produced through this kind of milieu. Otherwise, there's some ideological determination. But actually, artists already that put forward is overdetermination, always engage this kind of determination. So, or some underdetermination, the more or less, that is too much and too less, that is actually very, important, the occasion always coming along with this kind of technological development. So what do you think? This is, in my opinion, the kind of place of the artistic engagement?
Maybe it would be interesting, to displace a little bit the debate between, it's not necessarily about technology, but it's our relationship to objects. And which kind of world do we want to be in, actually? Is it a world full of objects, a commodified world, or the extension of the realm of subjects? And I think that's a stake, for today's art, especially today. Most of the important artists of all times don't think anymore in terms of subject-object relationship. And we have to address that question, collectively, actually, because we are more and more dealing with objects. And maybe art is a possible model provider for our coexistence with these very different types of subjects that are actually we are surrounded with. I wanted to quote the British anthropologist Alfred Gale, actually, that I quote in my book, who asks for considering artworks as persons, actually. And I quote Alfred Gale: "The immediate other in a social relationship does not have to be another human being. Social agency can be exercised relative to things, and social agency can be exercised by things and also animals. It just happens to be patently the case that persons form what are evidently social relations with things. Put it in relation with what Karl Marx was saying about commodification in the Capital. From the standpoint of market logics, commodities are self-sufficient. They are the true agents of social life. Humans only enter the scene as servants to their own products. Since commodities cannot walk, they assign to humans the task of moving them." So I think these two quotations actually draw very well the situation we're in. And what we have to elaborate, and I really believe that art is a potential model for this coexistence, is a new set of rules, setting new parameters for what I called an expanded or integral relational aesthetics. That's one of the main issues in my book. It's how to take relational aesthetics and just de-anthropocize this, actually. How to expand it to the non-human. And I think that's a very important stage. We entered an anthropological revolution in the 1980s with the first image that was produced not being a print of anything, but being the product of calculation. It was called digital image. It was totally new in the 80s. The first one actually took us into a very different anthropological era, in a way. It's not about printing anything anymore. It's calculation. It's projection, in a way. So that was a very important date. And obviously, also, it relates to Warren's researches about the digital.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
Warren.
okay, answering your question, yeah. First of all, I love that. Thank you, Nicolas, for that, because, Haroon Farouqi's work about operational images is significant in terms of that, in terms of these ideas of how images are created by data, by, by machines themselves. And the human element is becoming actually less and less involved. That's part of cognitive capitalism. If I might answer your question, Alex, about the difference between cognitive capitalism and neural capitalism, would that be okay?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, is that okay? So, and I would like to reference Yamuli Butang's book, Cognitive Capitalism. And I would like to also relate to Tony Negri in these definitions, and Franco Berardi, and Silvia Federici. This is where I'm getting my information. This is not my own ideas, okay? I just want to make sure that they're given credit. Maurizio Lazzarato as well. So there are two periods of cognitive capitalism. The first is the early period. Cognitive capitalism, in my own opinion, this is where I'm coming in here, is a product of cybernetics and the new cybernetics manifesting themselves in the workplace with, with this idea of looping, which is very important at this particular time. And it's characterized by 5 different characteristics. The first is precarity. Precarity, the precarious labor, the labor that is no longer has a safety net underneath it. I'll talk about precarity later with the concept, what I recently been writing and talking about, the superordinate precariat, which I'll talk about later. But basically, the precarious labor was the lumpen proletariat, the worker who had no safety net, who was being paid salary but had no benefits, no societal benefits. And this is called precarity. Now, precarity became very important as a term in cognitive capitalism because the cognitariat no longer could have a job forever. He wasn't at a factory or his corporation forever. He was moving around. He was constantly going from one job to another. And his benefits, as we know from Thatcherism, because this whole idea of cognitive capitalism is also connected to Reaganism and Thatcherism when workers' benefits started being taken away. So the idea of precarity. The second idea, and this is the work of Jonathan Crary, is 24/7 labor. There is no more weekends. We're working all the time. We have what's called real subsumption, which is related to 24/7. Formal subsumption, the labor that one does in a industrial shed, gives way to what's called real subsumption, where everything we do is work. So, yesterday I worked in my studio, and then I went to the Whitney Biennial, and it was after my working hours, my usual work from 8 to 6, and then from 7 to 11 I was at the Whitney Biennial schmoozing. I mean, that's basically what I was doing, right? But schmoozing is a type of labor. And I was, I had my iPhone with me. I was checking my iPhone, looking and taking a picture, seeing what kind of likes, the typical thing. But this is labor. It's creating data. Somebody's using this data. The whole thing, right? It's also massaging my social networks, which is also part of a type of labor. So that's the third part of it, is called the real subsumption. As opposed to formal subsumption. The next component is the idea that labor becomes immaterial. Labor is no more material. As Paulo Verno said, we're no longer producing objects and things anymore. We're producing emotions and feelings. And in this regard, communicative capitalism, this is a very important part of cognitive capitalism, this kind of immaterial labor of the public relations person, where the performative labor, right, doesn't produce an object or thing, but produces, emotions and feelings and desires and wants, and is a very important part of the marketplace. The other aspect of early cognitive capitalism is the financialization of capital, and that has two components to it, and depending on who you read, it matters in terms of who you read. So on one hand, some people think financialization of the capital is when the worker and the laborer invests in the same K1 form that his boss does, so that the boss and the laborer are investing in the same mutual funds or whatever, so that it's if the laborer strikes or does something against the company, he's actually hurting themselves. And the second part of the financialization of capital is, and this is from Christian Marazzi, he argues that this idea of financial is the idea of the psychology, the psychological effect of the market. So the market is no longer related to the production or productive efficiency of a company, but it has to do with the feelings and moods of the society as a whole, and the people that are working there. So that's the early definitions, according to these specialists, about early cognitive capitalism. Now, late cognitive capitalism, which is it kind of transitions into neural capitalism, because it's an important, it's very difficult to disentangle them. They're really, really connected. So the first thing is that biopower becomes neuropower. Populations of agents and processes of governmentalization are not about improvements in the body, but they are actually has to do with improvements of the mind and the control of the mind. And what's really interesting in in neural capitalism and late stage cognitive capitalism is what happens to the archive. The archive in early cognitive capitalism and in all the way from the beginning of modernism is constituted in photo archives and cultural archives like the like these places, the Library of Congress, for instance, where they keep all of the materials, the photographs, and the written materials of famous people, and they become an archive. Now that archive is sculpted. That archive isn't passive. Certain kinds of governmental power impose themselves onto that archive, and that archive is a receptacle of that power. So in the sense that, for instance, we're knowing recently about that the archive was changed and manipulated by the power to exclude people of color, for instance, or the power of the archive in which Mao Zedong in his photographic archive would manipulate the images and remove his adversaries, or Stalin removed Trotsky. I mean, these are famous stories and everybody knows them. So the fact of the matter is a certain kind of power, but it's something that is physical, it's material, it's something that is constituted in these special government organizations. Now, in late stage cognitive capitalism, the mind's eye and working memory become the place of this reconstitution. The archive is a manifestation of certain kinds of neurobiological events that are manifested from the external reality in this kind of brain, the idea of the intracranial extracranial complex, and they are constituted the set of memories that we have, the kinds of memories that we have, whether we were subjected to different kinds of trauma, whether as a child, or we are inundated by fake news, which according has a 15% greater retention than real news. So fake news affects people's memories, and I can get you the exact manuscript for this quote, but it's 15% more active in. It's kind of what Paul Virilio was talking about, the phatic image, the image that was highly intensified by the mediatic interface with humanness. This idea of the phatic image becomes the fake news image, which reconstitutes itself in a stronger way in the mind, in the mental long-term memories and short-term memories that become constituted when we bring them up into our imaginary state of the mind's eye. So that's another thing that happens. Neuroplasticity in the neural common becomes an important capacity. The common that Negri and Hart talk about, or the common that was part of what Nicolas talks about in the feudal times, which was a shared space that becomes commodified by the bourgeoisie. We are living in a moment when the neural common, everybody has the right to neuroplasticity and the neural diversity, everybody. And everybody has the capacity to be educated and to have the culture, powerful cultures that sculpt, in the terms of Gerald Edelman or Jean-Pierre Changeux, the famous neuroscientist from the Pasteur Institute, has the chance and the right to have the maximal ability of their neuroplasticity to be engaged. And culture is the most powerful aspect in my mind. We have a culture of becoming brain. So this idea of the neuroplasticity is an important part of neuropower. So that neuropower reconstitutes biopower, but the brain populations of brains and their neural commons are the focus of this this neural power. And yeah, so okay, and we could get into this other thing, but it's a little crazy and complicated. But it's called hedonism. So Taylorism, which was the managerial formula by which you could increase the laborer's surplus value, and Nicolas is talking about that. I love that discussion about surplus in your essay about the artist making these surplus images, surplus ideas through images, which can overtake the when the language is no longer there to help them think, or for various reasons that the artist makes images that give new kinds of words, in a way, new kinds of surplus. But there is this idea of surplus labor, in which the labor on the assembly line through Taylorist algorithms and things like that manage the body and its movement in relationship to certain tasks, increase the surplus value of the labor. And what's very important, and really was why I consider, besides the psychodynamic complexes of Freudian psychoanalysis that the brain without organs was against in schizoanalysis, I also think that part of the body without organs, the body without organs, one of the important parts was that it would defunction the body, it would change the body, it would disembody the body so that it can no longer function correctly along those Taylorist algorithms as efficiently, and would degrade the surplus value. Now, in cognitive capitalism, late stage cognitive capitalism, and in neural capitalism, with the use of neural, these things like neural economics and these new kinds of studying the brain to make it more efficient, it's about how do you make the brain more efficient in cognitive work? How do you link the brain? And this is what I was really interested with the neuroplasticity idea of the external artificial connectome. How do you make the brain more seamless with the algorithmic architectonics of the internet, the new workplace, so that this idea of surplus value, of cognitive surplus value, how do you increase that? You have to increase it by making a more seamless relationship between cognitive labor and the machines of this new digitality. And so that's another thing. And I developed this term called hedonism based on the neuroscientist from Canada named D.O. Hebb, who was basically the one who first understood the way that neuroplasticity worked at the synaptic level. And it's a whole lecture, and I wouldn't want to bore you with it. It's really boring to most people. But I use this word hedonism to talk about this increasing surplus value in cognitive labor. So those are the things.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So quite long explanation. Yeah, very interesting. And then I think actually, the one you discussed in terms of neural capitalism is about something like the capitalism, whatever called is this system started to calculate neural mechanism, right? The computational calculation there. Then it means everything turn into data. And then also it's connected to surveillance is what I mean. For instance, actually today, we have this kind of technology, is GPS and everything is Jean Baudrillard already actually anticipated, when the rocket, arrived in the moon, the metaphysics ended, something like that. And then the Earth is turned into some quite immaterial, is the abstract dimension. And then, for instance, I was in Macau in a few months ago, and then I had a friend, and then we went to the cafe and to drink coffee, and then we actually found some very vintage, the furniture is a vintage, the cupboard in the cafe. And then we discussed it, and then my friend took the picture of that, the cupboard. And then I found when, getting back to my hotel, the advertisement on my Facebook, the replica of that kind of, vintage cupboard. I didn't take a picture, but actually this, technology recognized me, with my friend, even, they recognize what kind of talk we actually exchange. So this is what I mean, actually. We are already, part of this world, and then no outside. And then there might be, defined as neural capitalism is as you said, is a seamless, connection between the brain mechanism and then, this kind of capitalist mechanism. And then, So, but I'm wondering, actually, that, also my question would go to Nicola, and then you actually discussed, many, the idea which was derived from Levi-Strauss and Escola, and then, Levi-Strauss actually also criticized this kind of totalization of the system, and then is of course in the capitalism, and then this kind of total system, which the based on the computation and the data. Well, of course, they didn't, they have, the concrete idea of computation, but in those days. But anyway, just he had, idea, mathematics. So the quantitative mathematics, he actually criticized quantitative mathematics, the quite a mechanical sense of cybernetic, and then he actually tried to put forward, alternative concept cybernetic, qualitative mathematics. So your idea, that you discussed in your book is, in my opinion, to some point, quite related to kind of Levi-Strauss concept of nature is naturalism. So is it really actually, the working, in this kind of situation? Is we still, retain this kind of nature? Of course, in my opinion, the new materialism, and then, Latour, and the many, the discussion, philosophical discussion, which deals with this kind of Anthropocene problem and Capitalocene problem. I think Michel Serre, for instance, actually already, proposed lots of idea about this one. But what do you think about actually how can we have this idea, of nature, in this kind of totalized world?
First, it's obvious that the acknowledging of a distinction between nature and culture is very ideological in itself already. Philippe Descola in 2005 published this which was a very important book about this artificial distinction, which was based again more or less on the same idea that moved Aristotle, which is the figure and the background. Nature as the environment of the only agent who is a human being. So this is not really possible to sustain anymore, intellectually speaking, obviously. And for this book, and to define what I call inclusive way of thinking, anthropology was of a great help. I mean, I must even say that certainly I really modified my way of thinking into anthropological inquiries in a way. What's important in anthropology, I think that there are two things which for me are crucial. Tim Ingold, the British anthropologist, defined it in a very nice way by anthropology is philosophy with the people in. And it relates very much to what I call rational aesthetics, obviously. But also, anthropology doesn't make any hierarchies between the data or the elements it takes into account. Hierarchy comes later with a different set of criterions than the ones that every society has to hierarchize their own production. Actually wrote a book about exclusion and the mechanisms of exclusion and production of waste, which is the X form. Inclusions is in a way the negative of this one, and a way to create a kind of a positive way of apprehend the metamorphosis of the contemporary society. So anthropology is a participative science in a way, and that's what interests me a lot. Participative because it doesn't have any object. Actually, what's the object of anthropology? It's the other. No, but it can be yourself. So it doesn't mean a thing. It's a knowledge without object, but it's a knowledge which is full of subjects and relations between subjects. And that's why for me, it's a paradigm upon which I'm building up my new writings, to be honest. There's no object but interlocutors, and that's what makes it very important for me as an art critic and a theoretician, because I always say that I only take my ideas from the studios. Actually, they are coming from the exhibitions and the studios, and I'm just a translator for those ideas into a different field, verbalizing them, which is more or less what an anthropologist is doing, if you think about it in a very dry way. But if, for example, if you come back to the very beginning of Warren's speech, you were talking, Warren, about the surprised by or interested by the fact that we're not producing objects anymore. It just surprises us because we're used to overproduce objects in a way. Because if you take some distance with this notion, if you examine the Runa society that is studied by Eduardo Cohn in How Do Forests Sing, or the Ashwa Indians, the Jivaros, studied by Philippe Descola in his first book, or all the societies that Claude Lévi-Strauss is studying and engaging a dialogue with, you will see that they actually don't produce objects so much, neither. They don't produce objects. They have more important things to do than producing objects. They are all like Douglas Hubler actually was saying in 1970, 71. I think I don't need to produce objects. They are enough actually, and I think that's a very important coming back actually. But it's not an evolution of the late capitalism. It's just something which is much deeper than that, I would say. And it's also a way of thinking. If you take the Amazonian societies, when they want to grow manioc, for example, they don't build a monocultural field which is geometrically defined. It's growing in the forest. They're using the already existing shape of the forest in order to grow manioc. And that's why the first ethnologists and colonizers, in the 19th century, saw the Amazonian forest as not being used, not being worked, being with no habitants, actually, because there was the signs of the transformation of the ecosystem into an agricultural zone was not there. But the forest has been cultivated by the Indians for thousands of years. And just we are not able to see it, which is very different. I'm quoting this example because it's about a way of thinking. And that's where the Amazonians have a lot to teach us, actually, today, especially because the forest is also a metaphor for something else, which is the data we are living. To come back to the second part of your speech, Warren, the data we are living on the anecdote, Alex, that you were telling about the coffee. We are living, signs everywhere, like animals which are hunted in the forest. Exactly. The hunters just look at the little sign and follow the rabbit or the deer or whatever they're hunting through the prints they leave in the ground, for example. And that's our situation now. We are just hunted, and we are the prey of this neuroeconomy, your neurocapitalism you're talking about. And it's also graphic, it's a new graphic, atmosphere that we're living in, because the tracks we leave, the prints we leave are all usable against us in a way, so it's would be able to create a kind of pan-paranoid society, in a way. Well, maybe it does exist actually. Sorry.
So okay, just according to the AI developer is Marvin Minsky. He talked about the paradox of the AI is artificial intelligence. For instance, he said a lot of people believe that actually the AI would replaced our manual labor, and then we can enjoy our leisure, the normal actually, the stupid, the small thing, and then we can, enjoy the, creating art or something like that. A lot of people believe that, but the Minsky said, it's wrong. As it, what AI could do is not, such a simple thing, but it doesn't do actually, the simple thing. That is actually what I mean. Actually, that the easiest one is most difficult for AI. The easiest thing for the human being is the most difficult for AI. So that is what this developer said. I think this is quite ironic situation in my opinion. So a lot of people believe that this kind of development of technology would bring us a more convenient, efficient world. But actually, the Nicola, you also mentioned, the disappearance of printing doesn't allow us, the more efficient, the working process is more complicated. We work more. We work more, for the machine. The machine doesn't work for us. That is actually quite ironic situation. And then this also, in my opinion, very important. The point, the Warren, tried to make in terms of neural capitalism. I think it's very stupid thing happening, but a lot of people believe that this is advancement, and then all people must follow this advancement. That is, in my opinion, ideological maniac, obsession. Yeah. Okay, so more ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one place where Nicholas and I agree, I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that it seems to me that in your essay or your book, Inclusions, you are really, really making a case for the importance of the artist, that the artist has a unique position, and in some ways takes the place, but not exactly like the shaman, but in a way takes on another role that is tangential and similar. And I just wondered, I want to ask Nicholas, how do you feel about artists that are involved with the market? And because the market itself, doesn't the market bring the artist from the edge and this special role into a more normalized position as a kind of aesthetic worker, making things for capitalism? And I mean, how do you feel?
I see your
how
point.
do you feel about that?
First, it's important to, in my book, I tried to demonstrate that art occupies a certain position within a structure, actually. And this structure can also shelter, and it did shelter in the Middle Ages, for example, or in different societies, sorcerers, witches, healers, astronomers, many people who were actually not into the mainstream. There's a specific place in any society, and Claude Lévi-Strauss, and Marcel Mauss before him, defined this opposition with the opposition of societies with artists and societies with shamans, which shows that it's more or less equivalent. I don't say it's the same thing. I don't say that artists are shamans. I'm just saying that they both occupy in the specific configuration of their own societies, a specific place, which is the place where that's what I write in the book, where you can hang the unknown, or you can hang the paradoxes, or you can hang what you cannot really think about in a different way. So there's a specific place for this in any society, which is occupied in our societies, both in Korea, United States, and France, by art. But the correspondences between the formal activities of the shamans in Siberia or South America and the artist is pretty much obvious. And I take the example of Marcel Duchamp, whose work actually in the 20th century is not that far from what shamans do, which is mainly displacing one object from one place to the other, or giving a banal object superpowers. That's exactly what Duchamp does. And so there's a specific place for artists in our society. And the market actually is part of this society, you know. When Piero della Francesca was actually painting, he was actually under the orders of the Medici family. When Benozzo Gozzoli paints, you know, in the private chapel of the Medici, that's the same. You know, it's you know, it's just paid to execute something. It doesn't take any of the magics actually for me. Cynicism can take away the magics for sure, because cynicism is always a bit stupid. It shows dumbness, and that's the main problem with cynicism, is that it doesn't produce any interesting patterns. It just dries up things. So market is not necessarily the problem, is because I don't see any society that doesn't that didn't you know, function with a kind of market, which means a type of exchange. So of course, some exchanges are more sympathetic than others, but mainly this structurally is always here, actually.
I also really liked your statement, what you mentioned, and you said that your inspiration comes from the studio and the interpretation of what the artist is doing. You mentioned that, yeah, you mentioned that, yeah. Right? And yeah, I also feel that way, because most of these books that I'm writing and most of the texts that I'm thinking about is, I always say that unlike Joseph Kosuth, who says, you know, that philosophy becomes before art, and I always say that art comes before philosophy. So I think that we're in agreement there also, because I'm arguing that, you know, artists, as they mutate,
it would be difficult to determine who's first.
Right. I'm saying both are good. I'm not saying, but it's you know, it's just a different.
I think people are practicing both in the caves, you know.
Right.
And storytelling also, you know, and dancing, you know, just all one thing. That's the origins of this specific place I was talking about, which is structurally in every society, and then it just decomposed into diverse specific, you know, mediums or disciplines, etc. But it was actually the same at the very beginning. Everything that's not directly productive or productive of material goods.
So you actually emphasize that anthropology helped, you know, which can shift our gaze on the art, you know, from the capitalist, the institution of art production.
Maybe not change our gaze upon art, but you know, providing us the right tools to evaluate it.
Right tool, right tool. It's a theory. What is that? Is it kind of theory or some perspective or some engagement?
Anthropology is more a state of mind, I would say.
It's a state of mind.
So it's a way to create the right distance with the subject you're incorporating into your own thoughts.
The knowledge with always.
Subject and object again. I'm talking about the subject you're incorporating. You're the subject you're entering in dialogue with.
Interesting. That was actually the most curious thing when I reading your book. You always talk about the subject.
Yeah, I understand.
Then
No, because
it's not actually the free will. You didn't
it's not
mean
obvious. I know.
Excellent. Yeah. Very, very actually moving. Yeah. It's very moving topic. So I think time is up now. Yeah. 1 hour and then 30. So do you have any more idea? Otherwise, that we should.
We will go on this discussion in different shapes in the future.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. So in person, and then I wanna arrange some kind of the discussion, next time, and not only online, but some kind of place.
Well, you guys are both in Korea, so a lot.
Yeah,
so
you actually come and
arrange that.
Yeah, Nicola gonna visit. When will you actually stay, Nicola? You just simply short visit or some long visit?
In last month, I was here for 10 days.
10 days. All right.
Between Seoul and Gwangju, and then the same next time.
So actually,
and maybe I'll be back in June actually also. But...
June is your long.
And then August. Well,
August. All right. Just yeah. The Warren has any idea to visit, and we will have another one. It's a Gwangju or Seoul. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you both of you for this nice conversation.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Nice. Very fruitful and productive. And then we actually promise next chance to see again. All right.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.